Everyone thought Emily Carter brought home a broken dog. That was the story by sunset. The college girl came back with a degree, found a starving mutt near the abandoned mill, and decided her father's sheep farm needed saving by a half-dead animal with a torn red collar. By morning, half the valley had heard about it. By noon, the hunters were calling him the college girl's guard dog. Emily heard them from the tack room while she rinsed dried blood from her hands. She did not correct them, because the truth was stranger. The dog had not been lying helpless when she found him. He had been standing in the middle of 10 other dogs, bleeding from the shoulder, one eye nearly swollen shut, refusing to fall until the last one backed away. He had not protected food. There was no food. He had not protected a den. There were no pups. He had protected a broken sheep bell lying in the weeds. That was the part Emily could not explain. And when she carried him to Dr. Helen Moore, the old veterinarian went quiet the moment she saw the collar. "Where did you find this dog?" Helen asked. "Near the mill." Helen touched the torn red leather like it belonged to a ghost. "This dog had another name once." Emily waited, but Helen did not say it. Not then. She only looked toward the Carter pasture, where the northern ridge turned black against the evening sky, and said, "Keep him away from Gideon Price." Emily was still thinking about that warning on the drive home. By the time the farm lights appeared beyond the field, she had given him a name, Ash, because he looked like something burned down and still breathing. Because Gideon was already there, standing beside her father, pointing at Ash like he was proof Emily had no business inheriting the farm. Robert Carter stood at the barn entrance with one hand on the gate latch. Behind him, nearly 400 sheep pressed against the rails, restless from the cold coming down the ridge. A folded notice from the bank showed from Robert's coat pocket, creased from being opened too many times. Emily saw it, and did not ask about it yet. In the truck bed, Ash lay wrapped in a gray blanket, breathing thin but steady. Dr. Moore had stitched his shoulder and cleaned the bites along his ribs. The torn red collar still hung around his neck. The cracked sheep bell sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in a towel, because Emily had not been able to pry it from his mouth until the medicine pulled him under. Robert opened the truck bed. Ash lifted his head barely an inch, saw the barn, saw the flock, and breathed out through his nose. Not fear. Recognition. Her father saw only ribs. He said quietly, "You should have left him with Helen. He would have died. Maybe he still will." Gideon Price made a patient sound from the post beside the lambing barn. He was almost 60, gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, and trusted by half the valley because he claimed he could read a wolf track in frozen dirt. Behind him stood 2 hunters from his crew and Luke Harris, a younger man Emily knew from town, who kept looking at Ash and then looking away. "That dog wanna fight?" Gideon asked. Emily said nothing. "With what?" he said. "A scarecrow?" One hunter laughed. Luke did not. Emily climbed into the truck bed and lifted Ash. He was lighter than a working sheepdog should have been. A body reduced to bone, fever, and stubborn breath. Gideon stepped into her path. "Careful," he said. "A hurt dog bites when it realizes kindness won't make it useful." Ash's eyes opened halfway. His head turned toward Gideon, and his whole body went still in Emily's arms. His lips lifted just enough to show the edge of one broken canine. Gideon's smile stayed, but his hand moved closer to the knife on his belt. Robert noticed. "Let her pass," he said. Emily carried Ash into the tack room and laid him on clean straw near the small heater. Above the saddle rack hung her mother's old pasture map, yellowing at the corners, marked in blue pencil with gates, water lines, windbreaks, and one narrow trail through the North Ridge that Robert had not used in years. Her mother had drawn it by hand because she trusted land more than men who claimed to know it. Outside, Gideon spoke low enough to pretend he was being respectful. "She came home yesterday with a diploma. Today she brings in a dying stray. Tomorrow she'll be telling you wolves are misunderstood." Robert answered, "She's my daughter. That's why you ought to be harder on her now, before the land does it for you." Emily closed her eyes. She had imagined coming home differently. She had imagined showing her father her research on flock stress, lamb mortality, rotational grazing, predator pressure. Instead, she had returned with blood on her shirt and a dog no one wanted. Ash shifted. A thin sound caught in his throat. Emily knelt beside him and checked the bandage. The shoulder wound was ugly but clean. The bite marks were fresh. Then her fingers found older scars near his neck and behind one foreleg. Straight marks. Too even for teeth. Too deep for brush. One circled the skin beneath the collar, as if something narrow had once cut into him and stayed there. Wire. Emily stopped. Dr. Moore had seen those marks. That was why her face changed. That was why she had warned her about Gideon. Ash watched her hand on the scars, then looked past her to the wall. Not the map, the old brass lambing bell hanging beneath it. It had belonged to her mother's lead ewe. When the tack room door moved, it gave a low, uneven note. Ash stared at it as if the sound had reached him from another life. A shadow crossed the doorway. Robert stood there, hat in hand. "How bad is he?" asked. "Bad," Emily said. "But not hopeless. You can keep him here tonight." "Tonight? My flock needs more than a rescue project." The words hurt because he did not say them cruelly. Cruelty would have been easier to answer. Emily stood. "I studied this, Dad. You studied animals in clean buildings. I studied herd behavior, predator pressure, stress patterns. You have not stood in a field at 2 in the morning while something screams from the tree line and every sheep you own tries to die in 4 directions." His voice cracked. Emily knew what sat between them. The night her mother went after a ewe in an ice storm and never came back from the creek crossing had never left this farm. Robert did not fear that Emily was wrong. He feared she would be brave the same way her mother had been. Gideon's voice cut in from the yard. "Robert, I need an answer before noon tomorrow. If my men guard the north side, we move the flock before dark." Emily turned. "Move them where?" Gideon answered from the doorway. "Stone Hollow. Easier to watch. Fewer open sides." Emily looked at her mother's map. Stone Hollow lay below the north ridge. Beside it, in faded blue pencil, her mother had drawn the mark for danger. Dead pocket. A place where wind folded wrong. Where panic pushed sheep inward. Where a flock could be trapped before anyone understood the shape of the trap. "No," Emily said. Gideon smiled as if she had done exactly what he wanted. Robert's face hardened. "We'll talk in the morning." Ash tried to stand. His front legs shook. Pain bent his body, but he pushed up anyway, eyes fixed beyond Robert, beyond Gideon, beyond the barn lights. Toward the north pasture, a low sound came from his chest. Not a bark, but every sheep in the nearest pen lifted its head at once. Gideon's smile slipped for half a second. Emily saw it. So did Luke. Ash collapsed before he could take a step. Emily caught him against her knees. No one laughed then. Outside, somewhere beyond the unfinished fence, a long howl rolled down from the ridge and spread across the dark fields. The sheep pressed closer together. Robert reached for the gate latch, and Emily understood that whatever had followed this dog out of the past had already reached their land. By morning, frost had silvered the fence rails. Emily found her father in the north pasture before breakfast, standing with Gideon Price and 3 men near the broken stretch of wire. The sheep had been kept in the lower field overnight, but they had not settled. Even from a distance, Emily could see them bunching together, heads raised, angled away from the ridge. Ash saw it, too. He lay on a feed sack in the back of Emily's truck, wrapped in the same gray blanket. Dr. Moore had said he should not be moved. Emily had agreed with her mouth and disobeyed with her hands, because leaving him alone while Gideon walked the pasture felt careless. Luke Harris noticed her truck first. Gideon smiled. "She brought the consultant." One hunter chuckled. Robert did not. "He should be resting," Robert said. "So should the flock," Emily answered. They didn't sleep. Gideon turned toward the sheep. They heard coyotes. That was not coyotes. Wolves, then. His tone stayed calm. "Which is why we're here." He walked to the damaged fence and hooked one gloved finger under the wire. North side is weak. Tree line gives them cover. Open slope gives the sheep too many directions to scatter. If this were my land, I'd move them to Stone Hollow before sunset. Emily stepped closer. Stone Hollow has one mouth and high walls. Exactly, easier to guard. Easier to trap. Gideon glanced at Robert, not at her. College teaches maps. Land teaches consequences. Emily crouched by the wire. The top strand was old, rusted brown, but the lower cut shone pale where metal had been exposed. Not snapped. Not weathered. Cut. When did this happen? Robert frowned. Could have been last winter. No. Emily looked at the mud beneath the post. A tire had pressed half a crescent into the soft ground, too narrow for their feed truck. This is fresh. Gideon's boot came down near the mark, close enough to break its edge. Careful, he said. You start seeing sabotage in every rut, you'll miss the teeth in front of you. Ash lifted his head. The movement was small, but every person there saw it. His eyes fixed on Gideon's boot, then traveled up to his face. The low sound from the barn returned, thinner now, rough with pain. Luke shifted his weight. Gideon looked at the dog the way a man looked at a tool he had once thrown away and did not expect to see again. Only for a breath. Then he laughed softly. That animal is nervous around men. Probably been kicked by half the county. Emily stood. He is nervous around you. Robert said her name, warning in it. Gideon raised one hand. No offense taken. She's protecting her stray. That's natural. She is protecting my flock, Robert said. Emily looked at him quickly, but Gideon had already claimed the sentence. Then let's protect it right. My men can cover Stone Hollow from 3 points. We put lanterns along the mouth, keep rifles on the ridge, and run the sheep in tight. By midnight, if anything comes down, we see it first. And if they panic? Emily asked. They won't if your father keeps control. It was not an answer. It was a hook placed in Robert's pride. The ewes shifted again. One lamb cried from the center. And Ash's ears moved before any of the dogs tied near the barn heard it. Emily saw the pattern. Ash was not watching the wolves. He was watching the sheep's fear. Dad, she said, they're already leaning south. Something pushed scent from the ridge overnight. If we move them north, we move them into pressure. Gideon sighed. Robert, this is what I meant. She's got good words, but tonight is not a classroom. The oldest hunter nodded. A skinny dog and a theory won't hold a ridge. Luke did not nod. Emily noticed. So did Gideon. Luke, Gideon said, you checked the creek line yesterday. Tell Robert what you found. Luke's jaw worked once. Tracks. What kind? Wolf tracks. How many? Luke glanced toward Emily, then away. Could be 4. Could be more. Gideon smiled without warmth. Enough. Emily rested her hand near Ash's shoulder. He was shaking, not from cold. His nose pointed past Gideon, past the cut fence, toward a stand of pine at the edge of the abandoned Miller land, the same direction as the old feed mill. Robert removed his hat and rubbed the brim between both hands. Emily knew that gesture. He did it when the bank called or when Weather took the hay before bailing. Gideon had chosen his morning well. I need your answer by noon, Gideon said. After that, I can't promise my men will be in place before dark. Emily looked at her father. Do not let him rush you. That's not rushing, Gideon said. That's the difference between planning and praying. Robert stared toward Stone Hollow, hidden behind the north ridge. Ash tried to rise from the truck bed. His front legs failed, but he dragged himself forward until the torn red collar scraped against the metal floor. He did not look at Emily. He looked at Robert. For the first time since she had brought him home, her father looked back as if the dog might be saying something nobody knew how to hear. Robert did not give his answer at noon. He gave Gideon something worse. Autist. By 2 o'clock, the lambing barn had been cleared down the center aisle. The ewes were pushed into the left pens, the yearlings into the right, and 5 nervous lambs were placed near the practice gate Robert used when training young dogs. It was not a real field. It was wood, straw, noise, and too many watching men. For Ash, it might as well have been a courtroom. Emily stood beside him with one hand under his chest. His bandages had been changed an hour earlier. The medicine dulled the pain, but not enough. Every breath made his ribs move like fingers under wet cloth. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. Ash's ears moved toward the lambs. Gideon heard her and gave Robert a look full of sympathy. "That's the problem. She knows he can't." Emily ignored him. Robert leaned on the rail at the far end of the aisle. "One pass," he said. "No chasing. No pressure. We open the gate, let the lambs drift, and see if he can turn them before they reach the side door." "The side door should be closed," Emily said. Gideon shook his head. "In real life, doors get left open. Gates break. Sheep run. A working dog either reads it or doesn't." That sounded reasonable. That was how Gideon made traps look like lessons. Luke stood near the door, not quite in the group, not quite apart from it. His eyes moved once to the latch. Emily followed his glance and saw fresh scrape marks on the wood, as if the door had been forced wider than usual. Robert raised his hand. The gate opened. The lambs drifted forward, uncertain at first. One nosed the straw. Another bleated for its mother. Then one of Gideon's men slapped the side rail with a flat board. The sound cracked through the barn. All 5 lambs bolted. "Hey," Emily snapped. Gideon did not look at his man. "Noise happens." Ash pushed up before Emily could stop him. His front leg buckled at the first step. He caught himself with his shoulder, stumbled into the aisle, and nearly went down beneath the rush of small bodies. The hunters moved back. One laughed under his breath. Emily moved forward, but Robert said, "Wait." Ash was too slow to circle them the way a strong dog would. He could not sprint to the front. He could not push the line by force. The lambs split around him, 3 to the left, 1 to the center, 1 straight for the open side door. Gideon spread his hands. There it is. But Ash was not trying to catch all 5. His head snapped toward the smallest lamb, the one running blind, the one headed for the gap between the door and the broken feed chute stacked beside it. Beyond that gap was the yard, then the lane, then the slope toward the north pasture. Ash changed direction. Not fast. Correctly. He cut across the aisle at a sharp angle and dropped his body low, not in front of the lamb, but beside the opening where the lamb would turn if panic took it. His wounded leg folded. His chest hit the straw. Still, he threw his head up and gave one rough bark. The lamb stopped so hard its back feet slid. Then it turned toward the other 4. Emily's breath caught. Robert straightened. The barn held a small, uneasy pause. Gideon broke it. "A dying dog scared a lamb away from daylight," he said. "That is not hurting. That is luck wearing fur." Emily knelt beside Ash. His stitches had not torn, but blood had spotted the edge of the bandage. He leaned into her hand once, then pulled his attention past her. Toward the side door. Luke had crouched there. He was looking at the dirt just outside the threshold. "What is it?" Emily asked. Luke stood too quickly. "Nothing." Gideon's head turned. Then closed the door. Luke shut it, but not before Emily saw what he had tried to hide. A print in the soft mud. Not wolf. Boat. Beside it, the dark line of a wire strand cut clean and curled back under the wall, like someone had dragged it from the north fence and tucked it where no sheepman would look during a test. Emily looked at Gideon. He was watching Ash, not the door. The dog had dragged himself onto his chest again, shaking from the effort, eyes locked on that hidden wire as if the smell of it meant more than pain. Robert came down the aisle slowly. His face was hard, but the certainty had thinned. "You saw the lamb," Emily said. "I saw a hurt animal push past what he should have been able to do. That counts." Gideon stepped between them. "No, Robert. That is exactly what gets people killed out here. You mistake one desperate moment for ability, then bet your whole flock on it." Outside the barn, a ewe cried from the lower field. Ash answered with that same low sound. Not loud, not strong, but every lamb in the practice pen turned toward him. Emily did not take Ash back to the tack room after the trial. She took him to town. Robert argued with her at the barn door, but not with the strength he had used the night before. His eyes kept returning to the side door, to the place where Luke had crouched, to the mud Emily had not imagined. "He needs rest," Robert said. "He needs answers. He's a dog, Emily. He's a dog somebody tried very hard to make disappear." That ended the argument. Robert stepped aside and watched her load Ash into the truck. The ride to Dr. Helen Moore's clinic took 20 minutes along the county road, past frost-white hayfields and leaning mailboxes. Ash lay on the passenger floor because he refused the seat. The cracked sheep bells sat beside him in a towel. Twice, when the truck passed openings in the tree line, he lifted his head and stared north until the road curved away. Halfway there, guilt tugged at Emily. Ash should have been asleep in warm straw, not riding toward another question. But if she left his past buried, Gideon would use that silence by nightfall. She told herself truth had to be gentler than abandonment, even when it hurt. For one sick moment, she wondered if she had used him too, putting his pain on display because she needed the truth. Then Ash lifted his head toward the bell, and she knew the question had not left him either. Dr. Moore did not look surprised when Emily came through the clinic door. She looked tired. "I wondered how long it would take," Helen said. Emily set the bell on the counter. "You knew more than you told me." Helen locked the front door, flipped the sign to closed, and led Emily to the back exam room. Ash allowed Helen to check the bandage. He flinched when she touched the scars beneath the red collar, but he did not growl. Helen worked slowly, with the care of a person apologizing through her hands. 3 years ago," she said, "there was a sheep farm near Mason Creek. Smaller than your father's place. Good land, bad debt, decent flock. They had a dog named Ranger." Emily looked at Ash. His ears did not move at the name. Helen noticed. Maybe he forgot it. Maybe he chose to. What happened? The story people tell is simple. Wolves came through during lambing season. The dog panicked, abandoned the flock, and the owner lost nearly everything. And the real story? Helen opened a drawer and took out a file so old the tab had softened at the corner. The real story is harder to prove. Inside were intake notes, a faded photo, and a copy of an emergency treatment invoice never fully paid. The photo showed a stronger version of Ash standing beside a flock gate, coat full, eyes sharp, red collar bright against his neck. Emily felt something twist in her chest. That's him. That was Ranger. The dog on the floor breathed through his nose, eyes fixed on the bell. Helen turned one page. He was brought in 2 days after the attack. Dehydrated. Torn pads. Wire burns at the neck and foreleg. He had not been running away from the farm. He had been tied somewhere. Tied by who? Helen's mouth tightened. No one wanted that question asked. Why? Because a failed dog was easier to explain than a locked gate. Emily leaned closer. What gate? The creek gate. It should have been open if the flock needed to be moved out of the low field. But when the farmhand found the place at dawn, the gate was chained from the outside. A memory from the barn slid into place. The wire tucked under the wall, the scrape marks on the side door, Ash staring as if metal itself had a smell. Emily's voice lowered. Did Gideon work that farm? Helen closed the file halfway. He advised them. That is not an answer. It is the answer I can give without proof. Emily glanced toward the front windows. Across the street, 2 men outside the hardware store were already watching. Helen followed her gaze. After Mason Creek, Gideon said the owner should sell before the bank took everything. A buyer came fast. I never saw his name on paper, but I saw his truck outside the farm the week before, dark green, narrow tires, back left fender dented. Emily remembered the crescent mark near the north fence. Her hands went cold. Ash pushed himself up suddenly, not all the way, just enough to raise his head toward the clinic's back door. The bell on the counter gave a faint sound as his shoulder brushed the cabinet. Helen looked at him, then at the bell. Where did you get that? Near the mill. He was holding it. Helen's face changed more than it had at the collar. That bell belonged to Mason Creek's lead you. Emily picked it up carefully. The crack down one side was dark with old dirt. So why was it at the abandoned mill? Before Helen could answer, headlights swept across the frosted clinic window. A truck slowed outside. Dark green. Emily stepped away from the glass, pulling Ash gently with her. The truck did not stop. It rolled past the clinic and continued toward the road that led back to Carter Land. Helen whispered, "Emily." But Emily was already reaching for her keys. Because Robert was still at the farm. And Gideon had just learned she was asking the right questions. By the time Emily reached Carter Land, the lower pasture was already moving. She saw it before she turned into the drive. A pale river of wool being pushed along the fence line, slow at first, then tighter where the ground rose toward the north ridge. Men on four-wheelers rode both sides. Two of Gideon's dogs worked the rear, barking hard enough to keep the ewes pressed together. Robert stood near the gate with his coat unbuttoned, signaling with one arm. Gideon had not waited for evening. Emily stopped the truck so quickly gravel snapped beneath the tires. Ash lifted his head from the passenger floor, weak but alert. The cracked bell rolled against the towel with one dull note. The sound made him tremble. "Stay," Emily whispered, though she knew he would not understand staying if the sheep were wrong. She ran to the gate. "What are you doing?" she called. Robert turned. His face had the closed look of a man who had already made a decision and could not bear to have it questioned. "We're moving them before the wind drops." "To Stone Hollow?" "It's the best place to hold them. It's the worst place if they panic." Gideon rode up on his four-wheeler and cut the engine. "You went to Helen." Emily looked at him. "You went past Helen's clinic." "I go through town every day." "In a green truck with a dented fender?" Robert's eyes shifted to Gideon. "Only a little." Gideon removed his gloves slowly. "Robert, if this becomes a story about trucks and ghosts from old farms, you need to decide whether you want tonight handled by people with rifles or by a girl chasing rumors." Emily pulled her mother's folded map from her jacket and opened it against the gatepost. Blue pencil marked Stone Hollow with one warning. "Dead pocket. Wind drops in from both sides there," she said. "If wolves enter from the west mouth, the flock crushes against the back wall." Gideon tapped the escape line above the hollow. "That trail washed out after the spring slide. I checked it myself." Luke froze over a supply strap. "Tell her," Gideon said. "There was a slide," Luke said. "Is the trail gone?" Emily asked. Luke swallowed. "Part of it." Gideon stepped off the four-wheeler. "Enough of it. Tonight we do not bet a flock on a half-trail and a dying dog." A rough bark broke from the truck. It was a broken sound, but the nearest sheep stopped moving. Several heads turned toward the drive. One of Gideon's dogs lunged at the paws, barking them forward again. Robert flinched. Emily noticed, and suddenly she understood what Gideon had been using all morning. Not logic, not land. Fear. "Dad," she said more softly. "This is not the night Mom died." His jaw tightened. Gideon looked down, almost respectfully, as if giving grief privacy. But his words slid into that opening. "Your wife died because she went out with too little help and too much heart. I am offering help." Robert's face changed. Emily's anger rose so fast she nearly lost control of it. "Do not use her." Gideon turned to her. "I am honoring what he lost. You are repeating it." For a moment, the only sound was hooves pushing through frost-stiff grass. Then Robert said, "Enough." Emily stared at him. "We move them to Stone Hollow," he said. "Gideon's men take the ridge. You keep that dog in the tack room." Ash answered again, weaker this time. The sheep nearest the road pulled south, not north. Emily saw the line of their bodies angle away from Stone Hollow. Ash was seeing the same thing from the truck, trying to drag himself upright with one bandaged leg slipping against the floor mat. Robert would not look at him. Gideon lifted his hand, and the men opened the north gate. The flock began to funnel through. Emily looked at the map, then at the ridge, then at Luke. He had gone pale. When Gideon rode ahead, Luke stepped close enough to speak without moving his lips much. "The trail is not gone," he said. Emily kept her eyes on the sheep. Luke's voice shook. "It is blocked with brush, but it passes. I hunted rabbits there last week." "Why lie?" Luke looked toward Gideon's back. "Because men who work for Gideon learn what not to remember." Before Emily could ask more, Robert called her name from the gate. Not angry. Afraid. The last of the ewes passed into the north lane. The sun had begun to lower behind the ridge, throwing long shadows across Stone Hollow. Ash forced himself halfway onto the truck seat, eyes fixed on the moving flock. The cracked bell slid from the towel and struck the floor. This time, its broken note carried across the yard. Every sheep at the rear turned at once. And from the trees above the hollow, something answered. Emily should have followed the flock. Every practical part of her knew that. The sheep were already moving toward Stone Hollow, the sun was dropping, and her father had chosen Gideon's plan in front of everyone. If Emily wanted any chance of stopping him, she should have stayed at the gate and argued until her voice broke. But the sound from the trees changed Ash. The broken note of the bell had crossed the yard, and something had answered from the ridge. Not a wolf, not a coyote. A metal sound. Faint, uneven, almost swallowed by wind. Ash heard it and tried to climb through the truck window. Emily caught him before he fell. Luke reached the truck at the same time. His face had lost all the color it carried in the pasture. "You heard that?" Emily asked. Luke nodded. "What was it?" He looked toward the old mill road. "A chain." Emily stared at him. "At Mason Creek," Luke said, "people said the creek gate was chained after the wolves came. But my uncle said the chain was never found on the farm." "Where was it found?" Luke looked toward the abandoned feed mill. The mill stood less than a mile from the place where she had found Ash. Hidden behind sumac and broken concrete, the same place where he had fought 10 starving dogs and still guarded the cracked bell like it was alive. She wrapped Ash in the blanket. Luke grabbed the truck door. "We have maybe 2 hours before dark. Then talk fast." They drove with the windows cracked so Ash could scent the air. He did not sleep. Pain bent his body into the floorboard, but his nose stayed lifted, tracking something Emily could not see. The abandoned mill appeared beyond the trees, its roof sagging, its loading doors broken open. Near the back, behind a stack of rotted pallets, Luke led her to a rusted chain looped around the base of an old gate post. It had not been left there by accident. A red thread of worn leather was caught in one link. Emily knelt. Ash made a sound so low it barely escaped him. This was his. Emily whispered. Luke looked sick. "I was 14 when Mason Creek happened. Gideon took me with him after the attack. I thought we were checking for wolf tracks. He made me stay by the truck. But you saw something." "I saw him carry a chain." The words landed between them and stayed there. A voice came from the open loading bay. "Boy should have said that 3 years ago." Emily turned. An older man stood in the shadow, one hand wrapped around a cane, a feed store cap pulled low over his eyes. His beard was white and untrimmed, his coat patched at both elbows. Luke swallowed. "Mr. Voss." The man looked at Ash, and his hard face softened. "Well," he said, "Ranger made it back after all." Ash's ears moved. "Not much." "Enough." Emily stepped closer. "You knew him?" "I worked Mason Creek before the bank took it." He came slowly into the light. That dog knew the low field better than any man on that place. He could move lambs through fog without snapping at one of them. Then why did everyone say he ran? Voss looked past her toward the ridge. "Because people prefer a coward dog to a coward man." Emily felt the sentence settle into her bones. He pointed his cane toward the chain. "Night it happened. Wolves came down early. 3, maybe 4. Enough to start panic. Ranger had the lead ewes moving toward the creek gate. I heard that bell from my bunkhouse." "The bell I found?" "Lead ewe wore it. Old cracked thing. You could hear it even in bad weather." His eyes moved to Ash. Ranger knew to follow that sound and push from the side. He was getting them out. Luke whispered. Then the gate was locked. From outside. Voss's jaw tightened. By the time I got there, the flock had folded back into the low field. Ranger was tied to the post with that chain, fighting it until the wire cut him. He chewed through part of his own collar trying to get loose. Emily looked at the torn red leather around Ash's neck. For a moment, the mill disappeared. She saw him younger, stronger, choking against metal while sheep screamed beyond a gate he could not open. "Who tied him?" she asked, though she already knew whose shadow stood behind the story. Voss did not say Gideon's name first. He only looked at Luke. Luke closed his eyes. Green truck. Voss nodded. Dented left fender. Parked with the lights off. Emily's phone buzzed. "Robert." She answered. Her father did not greet her. "Where are you?" "At the mill." "With the dog?" "With proof." "Emily, the flock is halfway into Stone Hollow." Behind his voice came shouting, engines, and the rising panic of sheep being forced into a narrow place. Then Gideon's voice cut through, distant but clear. "Tell your daughter if she wants to save her pet, she should do it somewhere away from my line." Emily looked at Ash. He had pushed himself upright, trembling so badly the blanket slid off his shoulders. His eyes were not on the chain anymore. They were on the road back to Carterland. Voss touched the cracked bell with 2 fingers. "That dog did not lose Mason Creek," he said. "Men did." Emily folded the chain in both hands. It was heavy, rusted, and cold. For the first time all day, she stopped trying to prove Ash was useful. Now she had to prove he had been betrayed. And if she failed before nightfall, Gideon would make her father's farm the second place to blame the only creature that had tried to save it. By the time Emily returned from the mill, Stone Hollow had swallowed half the flock. Lanterns burned along its narrow mouth, making the trap look like a plan. Emily parked near the lower gate and stepped out with the rusted chain in both hands. Ash stayed in the truck, shaking under the blanket, the cracked bell tucked beside him. He had tried twice to follow her, and twice his legs had failed before he reached the door. Robert saw the chain first. Then Gideon did. For once, Gideon did not smile. "Where did you get that?" Robert asked. "The mill," Emily said. "Voss was there." Luke heard him. "This chain was used at Mason Creek. Ash was tied with it while the flock was trapped." Gideon looked at Luke. Luke's face tightened, but he did not step back. Robert stared at the chain as if it had been pulled from a grave. "Mason Creek was 3 years ago. And it is happening again." Gideon laughed once, not loudly. "That is a dangerous thing to say in front of witnesses." "Good," Emily said. "Then let them hear all of it." She told them the essentials. The locked creek gate, the red leather caught in the chain, the bell from Mason Creek's lead U, and the green truck with the dented fender. Gideon waited until she finished, then turned to Robert. "Your sheep are in the hollow. Wolves are above us. Night is less than an hour out. And she is chasing a drunk old feed-hand's ghosts because she cannot admit that dog is not enough." "Voss was there," Luke said. Gideon's head turned slowly. "So were you, apparently. Funny how memory improves when a pretty girl asks for it." Luke flushed. Emily stepped forward. "Leave him out of it." "No," Gideon said. "This is exactly who belongs in it. Boys who remember late. Daughters who come home late. Men who lose farms because they wait too long to make hard choices." Robert flinched at the word farms. Emily saw it. Gideon had saved that blade for the right moment. He reached into his coat and unfolded a document, already clipped to a board. "I was trying to spare you this in front of her." Robert's face went gray. "What is that?" Emily asked. "A protection agreement," Gideon said. "My crew takes the flock tonight. If the loss passes market threshold, unpaid fees are secured against the north parcel." Emily took one step toward it. "That is not protection. That is a land claim. It is collateral. For damage in the place you forced them into." Gideon's voice hardened for the first time. "I did not force grown men to do anything." Robert did not speak. "You were going to sign this," Emily said. Robert rubbed both hands over his face. "The bank called last week." The word struck because part of them belonged to her absence. While she had been away earning theories, her father had been choosing which bills could wait. But Gideon mistook guilt for surrender. Emily lifted the chain. "And you found the exact fear that would make him sign." A shout came from the ridge. One of the hunters pointed toward the upper tree line. The sheep inside Stone Hollow compressed at once, hundreds of bodies pushing inward, bells knocking against ribs, hooves striking stone. Ash gave a raw bark from the truck. The sound tore through him. Several ewes turned toward it, but Gideon's dogs rushed the edge and drove them back. "Keep that animal away from my line," Gideon snapped. "Your line?" Emily said. His eyes flicked to her. Too late. Robert heard it. So did Luke. Gideon covered quickly. "My defensive line. Do not twist words while we are trying to save your father's flock." Then he pushed the clipboard against Robert's chest. "Sign, or tell every person here you chose delay." Robert took the pen. Emily's heart lurched. Ash answered again, weaker and desperate, and the cracked bell answered beneath his blanket with one broken note. From deep inside the hollow, the flock shifted south. Not by much. Enough for Emily to see that Ash was not calling them to him. He was calling them away from the back wall. "Dad," she said, "look at the sheep, not the paper." Robert's pen hovered above the signature line. Above them, the first wolf stepped out between the pines. The wolf did not rush. It stood between the pines above the hollow with its head low and its shoulders still, watching the flock the way fire watched dry grass. Every man at the hollow froze for one breath. Then Gideon moved first. "Hold the line," he ordered. "Rifles up. Keep the sheep tight." His voice carried authority, and for a moment, everyone obeyed it. The hunters lifted their guns. The dogs lunged and barked. The flock pressed harder into the back of the hollow, bodies grinding against bodies, hooves slipping on stone. Emily saw the disaster before it arrived. "Stop pushing them inward," she shouted. "Give them the south mouth." Gideon did not turn. "You open that side, they scatter. They're crushing. They'll live if they stay contained." Ash barked from the truck, a broken, desperate sound that made his whole body fold around the pane. Again, the rear ewes turned their heads south. Again, Gideon's dogs drove them back. Robert watched the sheep, the pen still in his hand, unsigned. Luke stepped beside him. "Mr. Carter," he said, "don't sign that." Gideon turned slowly. The wolf above the hollow vanished behind the trees. "What did you say?" Gideon asked. Luke's throat worked. He was young enough that fear still showed plainly on his face, but something heavier had finally become worse than fear. "I said don't sign." Gideon walked toward him. "You want to explain why you're giving orders on another man's land?" For a second, Luke only touched the shape inside his jacket, as if the little black box weighed more than a rifle. Luke reached into his jacket and pulled out a small trail camera, mud on its casing, strap cut loose. "I set this last week near the north fence," Luke said. "Gideon told me to take it down this morning." "I didn't." Gideon's eyes sharpened. Luke held the camera out to Robert, not to Emily. "It caught him there after midnight. 2 nights ago. Same place the wire was cut." Gideon laughed, but the sound came too quickly. "Checking the line before wolves crossed. With bolt cutters?" Luke asked. No one spoke. The oldest hunter looked at Gideon's belt. Gideon's hand moved over it, too late to be casual. Emily stepped in. "Show him." Luke clicked through the images with trembling fingers. Empty fence, dark green truck, dented fender, then Gideon bent by the lower strand with a tool in his hand. Robert took the camera. His face did not change at first. Then something inside it gave way quietly. "Why?" he asked. Gideon's jaw tightened. "Because somebody had to make you understand how exposed this place was. You cut my fence? I demonstrated a weakness. You moved my flock into a hollow after making that weakness. I moved them where my men could protect them. Where your contract could profit from losing them," Emily said. Gideon pointed at her. "You keep quiet." Ash growled. "Not loud." "Enough." Luke looked toward the truck. "There's more." Gideon's face hardened. "Boy." Luke flinched at the word, and Emily saw the old habit try to pull him back into silence. Then the sheep inside Stone Hollow screamed. A second wolf appeared along the west mouth, lower than the first, using the rocks as cover. The flock surged away from it, straight toward the back wall. Robert dropped the pen. Emily ran for the truck. "Ash can move them," she said. Gideon caught her arm. "That dog crosses my line. I treat him like any other threat." Robert seized Gideon's wrist and pulled his hand off Emily. It was the first time all day her father touched Gideon like an enemy. Luke stepped between them with the camera clutched against his chest. Mason Creek was not the dog's fault. Gideon went still. Luke's voice cracked, but he did not stop. I saw you carry the chain. I was 14, and you told me if I opened my mouth, no one in this valley would hire my father again. So I kept quiet. The hunters behind Gideon looked at Luke, then at the hollow, then at the contract board lying in the dirt. Emily opened the truck door. Ash tried to rise before she touched him. His body could not do what his mind demanded. She slid both arms under him and lifted him down, feeling every tremor pass through his bones. You can't run, she whispered. Ash's eyes stayed on the sheep. No, Emily said, understanding him in the only way she could. You don't need to run first. She grabbed the cracked bell from the floorboard. Its broken note sounded once when it struck her palm. Inside Stone Hollow, the rear U's turned south again. Luke pointed toward the ridge trail her mother had marked on the map. The brush is thick, but it opens behind the second cedar. If we clear it, the flock has a way out. Gideon recovered his voice. You open that trail, you scatter 400 sheep into wolf country. Emily looked at the hollow, at the wolves, at her father, then at Ash. No, she said. We give them a direction before fear chooses one for them. Robert picked up the map from where it had fallen near the gate. His hands shook, but this time they did not close around a pen. They closed around his wife's blue pencil lines. The first wolf did not come alone. It stepped from the pines above Stone Hollow, lean and gray, while another shadow cut across the west mouth. The flock reacted as one body and drove itself deeper into the stone bowl. It was not simple fear. It was weight, breath, hooves, bells, and bodies grinding inside stone. Gideon pointed his rifle toward the upper ridge. Nobody opens that trail. Emily held Ash against her chest. His paws hung limp, but his eyes were alive in a way his body was not. Every muscle left in him was focused on the flock. Robert unfolded the map with shaking hands. The trail behind the second cedar, he said. How far? Luke looked toward the dark slope. 30 yards of brush. Maybe less. Then clear it, Emily said. Gideon swung toward her. You do that, you scatter them. You scatter them, the wolves take the lambs first. No, Emily said. They are already being crushed. You hear that? Gideon shouted. That is panic wearing a college degree. She wants you to open the only wall holding the flock together. One hunter hesitated. Gideon fed the hesitation. When this goes bad, he said, remember who chose a stray over a proven plan. Emily did not answer him. She looked at the hollow. The sheep were no longer a flock. They had become pressure against stone. A lamb vanished beneath a wave of legs, then surfaced crying. Ash heard it. His body jerked in Emily's arms. She set him down before she was ready, because he had stopped being something she could hold. He could not stand on all four legs. The wounded one folded at once. He caught himself on his chest, dragged forward, and fixed his eyes on the south side of the hollow. Emily lifted the cracked bell. One broken note rang through the cold. The rear ewes turned. Gideon cursed and motioned to his dogs. Drive them back. Robert stepped into his path. Call your dogs off. Gideon stared at him. You want to lose the flock? I want to see what she sees. That one sentence changed the men more than the camera had. Robert Carter was not pleading anymore. Gideon's jaw worked. You are making a mistake. No, Robert said. I already made one. Luke and two hunters ran toward the second cedar. Emily followed with the bell in one hand, and Ash stumbling at her side. He fell twice. Both times, he pushed his nose into her palm and forced himself forward. They reached the brush line as the first wolf came down along the rocks. A rifle fired. The shot hit stone and sent sparks into the dark. The flock slammed backward. Hold your fire, Emily shouted. You're driving them deeper. Gideon grabbed the contract board from the ground. Robert, I have written agreement authority once you sign. Let my crew do their job. Robert looked at the blank signature line. then at the camera in Luke's hand. Then, at the chain Emily had dropped beside the gate. "Your job was never the sheep," he said. Gideon's face hardened. "Careful." Robert turned the clipboard around so every man nearby could see the clause printed in small type near the bottom. In the event of loss exceeding market threshold, Robert read, his voice rough but steady, "Unpaid protection fees may be secured against the north parcel." The oldest hunter stepped closer. "Gideon, what is that?" "Standard language. For a neighbor in debt?" Emily said. "For a flock you moved into the one place my mother marked as a trap?" Gideon pointed at the wolves. "There is your trap." "No," Luke said. He raised the trail camera. "That was—" Luke raised the camera again. No one needed the image explained now. Gideon's truck, the cut fence, his hand on the tool. Gideon looked at Luke with quiet hatred. "You ungrateful little coward." Luke's face flushed, but he did not lower the camera. "I was a coward at Mason Creek. Not tonight." The words reached Ash. Or maybe it was the bell. Emily could not know. Ash dragged himself up beside the second cedar, placed his body at an angle to the flock, and gave a hoarse bark. Not at the wolves. At the sheep. Emily rang the bell again, slowly enough for the cracked tone to carry. The lead ewes shifted toward it. A narrow lane opened inside the pressure. "Cut the brush," Robert ordered. This time, the men obeyed him. Luke slashed cedar branches while another hunter tore deadwood aside. Emily pushed through thorn and frost, opening her mother's trail. Behind her, Ash moved 3 painful steps left, blocking the turn back into panic. Gideon saw the flock beginning to change direction. His control was leaving him in pieces. "You think that dog saved Mason Creek?" he shouted. "That dog cost those people everything. I did what weak owners never have the stomach to do. I controlled the risk before it took everything." Emily stopped. Robert turned. Gideon realized too late that he had said more than he meant to say. No one spoke. The hunters had heard the admission with their own ears. Luke's camera hung between them like a second witness. The second wolf dropped lower toward the west mouth. Ash heard the flock tighten and threw himself forward with the last of his strength. He did not chase the wolf. He did not attack it. He crossed the hollow's mouth at a broken diagonal, placed himself where the lead ewes could see him, and turned his head toward the cleared trail. Emily rang the bell. The sound cracked through the stone. The first ewe moved. Then another. Then the pressure inside the flock changed from crushing to flowing. Sheep poured toward the second cedar, not calm but directed. Luke held the brush aside. Robert ran beside the line, shouting old commands. The hunters turned their rifles away from the flock and toward the ridge, giving space instead of fear. Gideon lunged for Ash. Emily moved first, but Robert reached him harder. Her father caught Gideon by the coat and drove him back against the gatepost. "You do not touch that dog," Robert said. Ash collapsed as the last of the lambs cleared the hollow. For one terrible second, Emily thought he had spent everything. Then one small lamb, the same one with the thin white stripe down its face, turned back from the trail and pressed its nose against Ash's torn collar. Ash opened his eyes. The wolves remained at the ridge, denied the panic they had followed down. Gideon looked at the empty hollow, the unsigned contract, the camera in Luke's hands, and the men who no longer stood behind him. He tried once more. "You still would have lost them without me." Robert picked up the rusted chain and let it fall at Gideon's feet. "No," he said. "We almost lost them because of you." Only then did headlights sweep across the lower gate. Dr. Moore climbed out first, then Voss, carrying the strip of red leather from the chain in one trembling hand. Voss looked at Ash, then at Gideon. "You chained the only thing trying to open that gate," he said. This time, no one needed him to say it before the flock was saved. By dawn, Stone Hollow looked smaller. In darkness, it had seemed like a mouth waiting to close. In morning light, it was only rock, frost, trampled grass, and marks where fear had almost become loss. The flock stood in the south pasture, tired but alive. Every ordinary sound felt like mercy. Ash lay on a folded blanket beside the lower gate. Dr. Moore had worked on him in the tack room until her hands cramped. The stitches on his shoulder had torn, and one paw pad had split open against the stone, but he was breathing steadily. When Emily sat beside him, he opened one eye as if checking whether the sheep were still where he had left them. "They are safe," she whispered. His eye closed again. By sunrise, Gideon Price was gone from the pasture. The sheriff had the trail camera, the contract, the chain, Voss's statement, and 3 hunters newly willing to speak. Gideon kept warning everyone about wolves as the deputies led him away. No one needed him anymore. Robert spent the morning repairing the north fence himself. He did not ask Emily to help. Maybe he thought apology needed silence before words. Emily let him have the first hour. Then she carried the toolbox across the frost and set it beside him. Robert looked from the toolbox to her. "I should have listened." Emily pulled a staple from the box. "Yes. I was afraid," he said. "I know." "No," he said. "I made fear sound like wisdom. There's a difference." Emily looked toward the south pasture, where Ash slept under Dr. Moore's watchful eye. "I made guilt sound like proof. I wanted him to be useful so badly that I almost forgot he was already worth saving." Robert's mouth trembled, but he did not turn away. For a while, they worked without speaking. Wire stretched tight. Posts took the weight. The broken place became a fence again in daylight. Near noon, Robert gave Emily the ring of keys. Feed room, north gate, medicine cabinet, old equipment shed. The keys had hung from his belt for as long as she could remember. "I'll still get in your way," he said. She smiled faintly. "I know. But this place needs what you learned. And what you know." He looked relieved that she had not taken everything from him to claim what was hers. 3 days later, Ash stood on his own. Only for a few seconds. Emily did not cheer. She knew better now than to turn healing into a performance. She simply crouched in front of him and held out her hand. Ash took one step, then another, then sat down hard as if offended by gravity. The lamb with the white stripe approached first. It touched its nose to Ash's torn red collar. Ash did not move away. By the end of the week, the ewes stopped giving him the wide path they gave strange dogs. They passed near him at the gate, calm and watchful. On Sunday morning, Emily removed the red collar. The leather was cracked, darkened by years of mud, blood, rain, and blame. She washed it gently, dried it with one of her father's old towels, and carried it to the main gate. Robert followed but did not ask why. Emily hung the collar on a clean nail beside the latch. Not on Ash. Not anymore. He had earned something softer around his neck, something that would not remember wire. The old collar belonged where every person entering the pasture would see it. A warning. A witness. A name returned without needing one spoken. The white-striped lamb came to the gate and pressed its nose against the red leather. The collar swung once in the morning wind. Robert stood beside Emily, his shoulder touching hers. "He earned that gate," he said. Emily watched Ash lift his head from the straw, eyes on the flock, ears turned toward the hills. "No," she said softly. "He remembered it."